So one of the most annoying things in chess is that when your opponent wins a game very quickly and just beats you in the opening. And one of the ways that especially in the beginner levels they try to do it is with the early queen moves. Now what do I mean by that? So you have probably all of you heard and see this queen move, which is also known as the scholar mate. And what this move does is it very sneakily attacks this pawn on f7, not right away, but when the bishop also comes to c4, there will be an attack on f7. And the reason that it works in many beginner games and it's very dangerous for them is that if you look at the starting position of chess, the two most weak points of the chessboard are these 2 pawns because they only are defended by the kings. You know, every other pawn when you look, it's defended by something else, something more actually less valuable and more powerful than the king, because king are really weak defenders. So now when I show you this position, after e4, e5 and queen h5, I want to show you ways that you can generally punish and counter these early queen moves that attack you immediately, and you have to be aware of techniques not to get into trouble. Okay, so the first things first is that I would say the most important thing is that you do not panic, you do not overreact, but also you cannot be really relaxed. I have seen many people, and here I'm seeing the Lichess database, they would play the move knight f6 to attack the queen. Unfortunately, queen also not only attacked this pawn but also attacked this pawn, and he can take this with check. So you have just lost the pawn. Another very common mistake that beginners make is the move g6, which after, again, white can take this pawn, and this time not only you lose a pawn, but after, let's say, queen e7, you also lose your rook on h8. So this is a disaster. So to avoid this disaster, you have to look at what your opponent wants to do. And in this case, he's attacking this pawn on e5. So you play the move knight c6. Okay, now white will continue with bishop to c4. And again, you have to look what they are doing with this queen. What is this queen doing? And immediately you will realize that it's attacking on f7. So again, if you play the move knight f6, which actually a lot of people did, this is not going to be a very enjoyable game for you. So you have to defend this pawn somehow. And you can do so by playing the moves queen e7 and queen f6, but generally I recommend not to bring the queen out in the opening so early and play the move g6. This way you stop the attack on f7 and also attack white's queen on h5. So now white's queen most likely will return to f3, and still, that's the point that I'm trying to make. You cannot relax, you have to be always aware. Although white's play is not very dangerous, it still has some venom. So many people in this position play very weird moves, such as bishop g7, knight d4, and f6. Actually, f6 might be the least worst of them, but after knight d4, white again checkmates you on f7, and also after bishop g7. So you cannot relax, and you have to both continue development but also defend against f7. Now queen f6 is not a very bad move, but I like knight f6 more. You're just developing the knight as it should be, and then also you are defending against this attack on f7. So now now I will also show continue of this variation just to give you an idea that even though white's position is not great, it's also not so bad. So you shouldn't have expect to just win this game automatically. You have to continue playing good moves and playing natural developing moves, and at the end, at some point, this queen on f3 will be misplaced. So let's take a look at one of the common moves that I see here in the Lichess database, which is the move g4. It has the not so subtle plan of going g5, kicking this knight and again checkmating on f7. So for example, if you just ignore it, after g5 you are already in trouble. Actually, okay, you do have a saving move, but more on that later. But the point is that here you will get checkmated. So after g4, you will see that this queen on f3 is a little bit misplaced, is in the way of its pieces, and you have this very nice move knight to d4. Sorry, after g4, you have this move knight to d4 to attack the queen. And when the queen moves, let's say to d1, now there is no fear of g5 and checkmate on f7. So you can just continue developing by either going d6 or actually d5, which is what I like, the more active plan. And here you have the more share of center. White played g4 for no reason. This pawn is going to be weak, and we have a very nice pieces in the center and easy development. So g4 is not a very good move. Now, in order to stop this knight d4, many white players play c3, and that's a good move. Then you don't need to do anything special. We stopped white's threats, so we continue developing bishop to g7. White will play d3 to also continue development, and here you can just go short castle. There is no danger. So white will continue with bishop g5 and just d6. And you probably know the Italian opening, and it's a very similar opening where white puts his bishop on c4, plays d3, and sometimes goes bishop g5. But in all of that Italian openings, white knight is going to f3. Here, because the queen is misplaced on f3, white cannot place a knight there, and therefore his position doesn't make that much sense. You can continue with the move bishop to e6 and h6 to ask this bishop what it wants to do with this pin, and then in general black has a very solid and a very nice position with this bishop on g7 defending the squares around the king. So in general, what is important about this so-called scholar's mate is that you do not panic. This queen h5 move is not a very good move, but it's also not a very bad move. It does attack the pawn on e5, so you have to take it step by step. First, just defend this pawn on e5, and after bishop c4 threatening mate, you play the move g6, very important, to stop the mate, and after queen retreats, then you start developing, actually not but knight d4, but knight f6 to stop the mate again, and then you just continue slowly developing your pieces, and black has a fine position. Okay, so maybe another early queen moves that beginner make, and this one is actually not very bad, but I just wanted to mention it because it's also very common, is with black. So let's flip the board. So this is called the Scandinavian opening, and it's when black responds to e4 by playing d5, and after recapture he takes with his queen. Now this is not a bad opening at all, but what black is doing is pretty risky. So you attack the queen but knight c3, and again when the queen comes you ask yourself what it wants to do. Does it attack anything? Well, not really, so we can just attack it and push it away. Now actually the most common move in the Lichess database here is the move queen to d8, and this makes basically no sense. So you see, that's why we say don't bring the queen out in the opening so early, because after just two moves it took on d5, and after knight c3 it just went back all the way to d8. So that was basically a waste of time, and you can continue your development with knight f3, d4, bishop c4, and short castle, and here I believe white has an advantage. Although black's position is pretty solid because he didn't create any weaknesses, and also because his d-pawn is exchanged, he is free to develop this bishop whenever he wants and wherever he wants, but still white has a lead in development. Let's say we play knight f3. Now we have two pieces out and black has 0 because black just moved his queen out and then all the way back to d8. Now another common move is queen to a5, and you can see that why a5 is a good square for the queen, a relatively good square, because it's not easy to attack it immediately. But what we can do in the future is that when you are thinking about your development, First of all, you develop naturally, right? Knight f3, d4, and so on. But at some point, we're going to play the move bishop d2 and place our bishop in the same diagonal as this queen, and then this square on a5, which is now looks safe, will be not safe that much. So that's also another thing. And the third common move here is the move queen to d6. This is the move that Magnus Carlsen popularized, and he has played it in the regular basis when he's playing the Scandinavian. Now, this is also at the first sight looks a safe square for the queen, but you will see after you develop your pieces, and let's say knight f3, d4, at some point knight b5 will come, and again you will attack this queen and the queen will retreat to d8. Now some black players, to avoid that, let's say we go knight f3, let's make some moves, knight f6, d4, and so many of them here will play the move a6 just to stop knight b5. But a6 is not a very useful move, and therefore black is losing a tempi, and white is just continuing with the development. And again you will see that we have 3 pieces out, and black only has 1 piece and his queen out, and he's not ready to go short castle. He has to first play e6, develop this bishop, and then go short castle, while we as white are ready to go short castle next move. So this is also not very great for black. Now there are more advanced examples of early queen moves, and I want to show you something else. That is in the Vienna gambit, which starts as e4, e5, let's say knight c3, knight f6, f4, this is the Vienna gambit, black plays d5, fe5, knight e4, and this is a good line with black. I play this line with black, and here white has 2 challenging moves. One of them is knight f3, which is the most common in the grandmaster level, and another one which is a tricky move, queen f3. Now this is also bringing the queen early out, but this is not so bad because we are putting pressure on this construction. We are putting the pressure on the knight on e4 and on the pawn on d5. So it's not so easy for black to defend this. And actually here as black, I play the move f5, which is a radical move, but it does defend this construction. And if white takes, then I'm gonna take back to the knight, and now we are safeguarding this pawn on d5. The only drawback is that since our pawn on f7 is missing, our king will be a little bit weak on this diagonal, and later when we castle on this diagonal. But this is not such a huge drawback, and therefore this is a good line for black. But of course f5 is not the only move here. You can also take on c3 with the knight, and after let's say bc3, which is the most common move, taking towards the center, you can play the move knight c6, attack this pawn, and after d4 you can just continue development with bishop e7. And you notice that although this queen on f3 is not the most useful piece, it's also not bad, and it's not easy to attack it, like we cannot play bishop g4. But there is one point. After we go short castle, the move f6 becomes very relevant because our rook is on f8 and is pointing down towards this queen on f3. So this might not look like a bad spot for the queen at first, but again in the future it can be attacked at some point. So all in all, I hope that I provided a guideline that you can follow to stop all the early queen moves and somehow punish them, and not let your opponents checkmate you very quickly. And I just wanted to mention some statistics as well, that after knight c6, bishop c4, actually knight f6 has occurred more than 150,000 times in the Lichess database. So this mate is really common among all levels of the players, mostly among the beginners, and hopefully from today you will be not fearing that again, and here after the move g6 you are good to go and you don't need to get checkmated. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.